I'm good to go?
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Okay, so I thought I'd start with the obvious broad question of what is an observation, just because I think that it's really important to clarify this, and I'll go to a fair bit of depth here as I break things down. So at the most obvious level, it's simply watching something being done with the purpose of either learning or teaching. And really, if we think about that, we are looking for some sort of evidence, or we are trying to appreciate, or we're assessing some skills in practice. So skills in practice as opposed to academic knowledge of how to do something. And that might apply to a whole range of things. I seem to have lost control of the slides. All right, there we go. Anything where it's not a purely knowledge-based activity. So I've given some examples there of mechanics, cookery, sales, and obviously teaching. Sorry, I'm having some issues with the slides here, Sophie.
Yep, I'll move it on for you. Yep.
Oh, okay, just a bit of a delay. And one of the central points that I'm going to make today is that observations really should be part of a broader learning program. So I'm going to be giving more of an introduction to observations and some general statements. And one of the key ones there is that just as examining at the end of a course of study is valuable, or during a course of study is valuable for supporting learning and assessing learning, it's not the only part of it. You need the face-to-face teaching. You need the guidance, the counseling, the mentoring. You need the study and the theoretical learning as well. The other thing that I think is important in this discussion straight off the bat is that when we're talking about teaching observations, we're generally talking about classroom teaching practice. So it's really important when we're thinking about teachers to not isolate them to a single identity of a person in front of a classroom. There's a lot more than that. There's obviously planning the lessons, planning courses, and creating materials. There's counseling and advising students. There's assessing and testing, reporting on them. Keeping records of progress and so on. So there's a lot there, and I think anyone who manages teachers would quickly recognize that. You might have someone who's fabulous in front of the class, but then if they don't have any of those other skills to an adequate level, they're not necessarily a great teacher as the broader sense of the word. So observations are obviously a vital part of teaching and developing those teaching skills, development of the theory into practice, but they're not enough just by themselves. Now, just quickly, I'm going to look at, well, actually not that quickly, I'm going to go to some depth here. We're going to look at different types of observations, and really when it comes to teaching, and particularly in ELICOS, there's three really common types of observations. The first one is professional development observations. This is probably the central point of what we're going to focus on today. Another type is quality control observations, or checking standards of teaching. And a third kind is, if I can get it to work, is peer observations. So teachers watching other teachers. Now, it's really important to remember that each of these different kinds of observations have different functions. They achieve different things. They need to be set up in different ways, and they would be carried out and followed up on really quite differently. And it's important to remember, and one of the most common mistakes in my experience of going into schools and seeing their observation practices and so on, is trying to use too many of these at one time, trying to overlap and use classify a professional development observation as a quality control, or cross-match the techniques that you're using within them. And that's something that I'm going to try and clarify right now. So if we start by looking at professional development observations, just some key aspects that would characterize these. Firstly, they should be really supportive. And that, I mean, from a personal, emotional perspective. Observations can be quite stressful, and we'll talk about that again in a second, but observations can definitely be quite stressful. And we want to support the teachers and make them feel confident and comfortable. And in helping them develop the lesson and helping them through the lesson, we need to be giving them guidance and help in that way. And they should also be scaffolded, and I think this is quite a common term in language teaching. I think it's also useful in any kind of teaching, really. We want to provide them with the guidance and the support and the boundaries with which to focus their attempts at development and improvement. And that's my next point, which is that they really should be targeted. So we should be, for each individual that we're doing one of these observations with, we really should be finding a key focus for that person. What is it that they want to get from the observation? What is it that they want to learn? And then having that as a planned learning outcome, just as you would with any kind of teaching. Moving on to quality control, and I don't think many people actually use the term quality control, but certainly these are quite different to professional development observations. Here you would say that they would generally be, well, they would be general. There wouldn't be a particular single focus that you would necessarily set for a teacher, that you might just get them to do a standard lesson that they might do. And you would set up some criteria for them to be measured on, and some standards that they should reach on each of those criteria. And as it sounds, it is much more of a test. It's not nearly as focused on being a learning process, but much more testing and making sure that the teacher is of a certain level of quality in their skills. And really what we're looking at here is making some decisions. We're looking at, do I employ this person? Do I give this person the higher step or a new job, or do I put this person onto this more difficult course, etc.? So, there's a real managerial decision that comes out of that. The next category is peer observations. And again, it's a really very different setup here. First thing to remember is that, unlike in the other observations, here the observer is the learner. And this is, to be honest, I think in my experience of peer observation programs that I've either seen done, heard about, or been a part of previous to being a manager, this was the biggest mistake that I saw being done, where peer observations were used as professional development observations. The idea of a peer observation really is the observer as the learner. They are watching an example and they are trying to learn from it. It's not the other way around. And a key part of that is that the observer is a non-expert. They could be a brand new teacher who you want to watch a class and see how you do things at your school. They could be, learning a new kind of course. They could be just refreshing their skills. It could be a whole range of things, but they're a non-expert observer. They haven't been trained as an observer. And there's a real issue there around role clarity and making sure that that's 100% clear, that the observer is the learner and the teacher of the class is the demonstrator. And role clarity really is an issue. I mean, there's a real difficulty, and anyone who's been involved in peer observation programs can probably attest to the extra stress and the angst that comes in when one teacher is giving feedback on another teacher's lesson. They're colleagues. They're meant to be equals, and you know, putting one suddenly in the role of assessor can create some really uncomfortable situations for them once they go back to being colleagues. As I said, the observee, the teacher, is the demonstrator in this case. And really what we're looking at is learning and motivational outcomes. We want the observers to see some new techniques, we want them to see some interesting ways of doing things, and come out of it motivated to try those techniques and see how they go with them. All right, so moving on to, or back to professional development observations, and this is where I'll keep my focus for the rest of the time that I've got with you. What I want to do is just to go through some of the key elements of professional development observations and what's important to do, what's important not to do, and how to really extend them and make them as valuable as they can be. So the first point is really around the setup and the way in which you run an observation program. With professional development observations, I think the most common thing that happens in schools is that you know, every 6 months the DOS takes some time out of the day-to-day work, lines up all the teachers with a program of observations, and knocks them out over a period of 3 or 4 weeks, observing everyone in one go. It's often not possible to have the time aside to do it as a constant thing, but you know, perhaps that's a better way of keeping it as a natural part of the development program. But either way, key to a professional development observation is an element of transparency, in that it's clear to everyone what you're doing and why you're doing it. And one of the most important things there is that it's clear that the professional development observation is not a quality control observation. And that can take quite some convincing with a lot of teachers who've perhaps had some bad experiences, or just perhaps aren't used to the idea of professional development for its own sake. But it can be made clear with some policy statements. I've had some good success in really changing the way teachers respond to being observed by having a really clearly stated policy for how observations will work, what the role is, what the steps in a process are, what will be looked at, what won't be, what will come of the process and what won't, and so on. So really clarifying that in writing, making sure that everyone's aware of it and has some input into it, can be a really useful approach. Then with each observation, or within each set of observations, there really needs to be a setup process where you sit down and you go through those policy statements, go through the processes that you're going to follow, and the expectations and so on, and really just talk them through and make everyone get everyone to sit together and understand how they're going to work and feel comfortable with that. Just like any learning experience, if people are comfortable, if people are relaxed, then they're going to learn a lot more effectively than they are if they are feeling nervous, stressed, worried, fearful, etc. Negotiating goals and clarifying expectations has got to be a two-way process. And you know, remember that we're talking about learning here. You're not in control. Learning is much more effective if it's directed by the learner. i.e. the teacher who's being observed, if they're saying these are the things that I need to learn, these are the things that I'm interested in learning, then the learning is going to be much more effective. So, obviously as an expert observer and trainer and so on, you would guide and direct them in those goals, and clarify expectations and so on, but it does need to be two-way. The next thing I'd say, and I'll come back to this one in a minute, is it really needs to be a guiding and supporting process. It's got to be seen as a learning opportunity for the teacher, not as a chore for the director of studies to do, not as ticking the box on preparation for your upcoming audit, or and certainly not going back to that quality control concept of having criteria and standards where you tick the boxes. It's got to be seen as a learning opportunity. I've kind of repeated this a few times already, but it's important to recognize the impact of the observation. It makes the teachers nervous. It makes the observer often feel nervous that what they're going to see isn't going to be very good, and they're going to have to then do something about it. It's also important, I think, to recognize the impact on the students and on the actual learning process that you're watching in the classroom. Anything observed is different than when it's not observed. The students react differently to the teachers. The teacher acts differently. It's really important to recognize that, and normalizing observations can go a long way in helping, but it will certainly never remove the impact altogether. One thing that I've found helpful there is using previous examples of feedback and outcomes from observations, getting other people who have recently been observed to talk with the person that you're going to observe and really clarify how it works and what they got from it, and just sort of set them at ease. Just having a sip of water. The next thing I think is probably the third central point that I would put into my comments here on observations, or professional development observations, and that is that the observer needs ongoing training as well. I think pretty much every person who's involved in English teaching in our field would be very comfortable with the statement that just because you can speak English really well doesn't mean you can teach English really well. In my experience, the same approach isn't taken to observations, but the same rule applies. Just because you can teach English really well doesn't mean you can train teachers very well. They're different skills. The best speaker of English doesn't make the best teacher of English. The best football player doesn't make the best football coach. There are specific skills and things that you must be able to do to observe effectively and to train teachers effectively. So if you're going to do it, train in how to do it. Learn about how to do it. Learn the theory. Get some feedback on your feedback. My experience as a CELTA trainer really made that clear to me. I'd actually been observing for teachers as a DOS for years before I became a CELTA trainer, and it really made it very clear what a horrible job I'd been doing in those observations as I learnt the skills that I needed, and it was really quite rigorous training to become a CELTA trainer. Dozens of lessons that you observe, your feedback notes are assessed, your spoken feedback is assessed, and then even when you become a trainer, it's a constant. There's a constant training that goes on in the background to make sure that your skills are fresh and effective and so on. So if you are doing observations, get some training in how to do them. Today's session is a good opportunity for that. The next thing I'm going to talk about is going beyond the lesson. So earlier on I talked about how the observation is just of the teaching practice. So just some thoughts here on how you can go beyond just watching the lesson. Quite a few times I've seen observations happen where the observer has almost no contact with the teacher other than after the lesson. They've had no real role outside of that. What I would suggest is a few things. Firstly, the lesson and course planning are really key. If you haven't seen the lesson plan, and if you haven't been a part of the lesson planning process, it's almost impossible to make any more than a really superficial comment on the lesson as you see it. You don't know what the teacher's trying to achieve. You don't know why they're trying to achieve it. And as a learning process, you've missed a huge opportunity in guiding them towards doing those things effectively. It's like doing a language practice task without giving the instructions to students to use that language. They may do things in a really ineffective way purely because you didn't take the time to go through their lesson planning process with them and show them more effective ways to do it, which they could then practice and you could give feedback on. So definitely there needs to be a pre-lesson planning session, pre-lesson discussion between the observer and the teacher. The slides have gotten stuck again. I would also say an immediate post-lesson feedback. So often the post-lesson feedback is delayed by a few days. Again, considering the stress that that a feedback session, that an observation session puts on a teacher, I'd say it's really important to just spend 5-10 minutes getting some immediate feedback from the teacher on how they felt about the lesson, and to make the more full feedback that you're going to give later on more valuable, it is a good idea to potentially guide the teacher on things to consider in their reflections on the lesson. And so you would do a delayed feedback session with some written feedback, and I'll talk more about that in a second. And you would definitely have an extended follow-up. So often there's some really valuable learning action points, some learning focuses for a teacher that come out of an observation. Just telling them that those things are there is not nearly enough. You need to go a long way beyond that. So just thinking about how you can do that. You might obviously give those feedback and action points. In those, you really want to try and be positive and be motivational. I always remember my first trainer as a CELTA trainer. We were so dramatically different in the feedback that we used to give. I would look at the lesson and see all the things that were wrong with it and all the things that the person didn't do or should have done and so on. And she would always look at them and be able to see what the person had tried to do, what the person had done well, what the person's aim was, and how to tweak that a little bit in the right direction. And I found that an amazing learning experience, and would certainly say that it led to much better learning for the teachers who received that positive motivational feedback. It's just tweaking, just giving recognition for the effort that they've put in those directions, giving recognition for what they're trying to achieve, not just what they didn't. One common technique is sandwiching feedback. Different people have different opinions on this. Personally, it's not my preference. I actually normally will go with two separate blocks. I'll start with the positive stuff and then go with the constructive action points afterwards. But sandwiching can also help. Really key though is targeting the needs and limiting the number of focuses. If from the observation you've got more than 4 or 5 points for the teacher to work on, you're overloading them. It's going to be demotivational. Is that a word? Demotivational? Should be. It's not going to give them the level of focus that they need. So, there may well be more things. It's the role of the observer to really prioritize and choose the key focuses for that teacher. Writing the feedback, I think, is one of the hardest things for a lot of observers. And there, my advice would be that there's really a 3-step thought process that you can take. The first step would be student-focused. Think of, instead of saying, you should have done this or you didn't do that, turn it and say what the students needed, what the students would have benefited from. The students needed you to focus more on the meaning. The students would have enjoyed that more if you'd made it about them rather than about some random person, just as an example. But focus on it or write it from the perspective of helping the students, because that really is the role of the teacher. Then there can be teacher-focused things, and by saying teacher-focused things, I don't mean saying things that they didn't do or did do. I mean things that might help them with their process, things that might make their planning more efficient and effective, things that might make them feel more comfortable in the classroom, and so on. And finally, school-focused. I think it's really important to remember that teachers are employees, and we want to give guidance on how to be an effective employee of your business. So your business might focus on a different style of student. They might be more holiday-focused. They might be more, pathway students. It really is different depending on the institution where you work, and it's perfectly relevant to help the teacher become a better employee of the business, because that's a big part of their job. And then finally, I'd say, really key is supporting the change and clarifying expectations. So setting concrete goals for the teacher to achieve. You need to start using effective CCQs, and you need to be using these materials, or you could use these materials, and if you're working hard on it, then realistically I'd say you'd be confident in using them within a month or two. Setting realistic goals and schedules for teachers can really clarify what their way forward is, and really making sure that there's sufficient support for them to achieve that through mentoring, coaching, buddy teachers that they can do peer observations of, theoretical books that they can read. So that's me. So just really quickly to summarize, my key things that I'd like for you to take away from this would be that there are 3 different main kinds of observations, and you really want to try and keep them separate. With professional development observations, it's really vital that they are seen as a learning process, and you do all the things that you would do to help the teacher learn effectively. And finally, as an observer, make sure that you are working on your own development as well, and making sure that you're equipped to give the support that the teachers need. Thank you very much, and I'll pass over back to Sophie, I think.
Thank you for that. There's just a couple of questions which we probably have a couple of minutes to deal with. Are you happy to take them?
Sure.
Yeah, so Tamsin has asked, how can I learn to observe? What observation training is available?
That's a really good question. Not a lot, unfortunately. In my experience, and Juanita, you might speak to this as well. I don't know if we can speak at the same time, but
You can.
training as a CELTA trainer was my first real training in observation. There is some theory that you can read. I think that probably you could give. I'll make a plug to Navitas here. You could give Navitas or International House a call and talk to them about putting together a observation training program. I think that would be a really valuable thing. I'd say talking
or even English Australia.
Or English Australia. Talking to people who do observations, getting back in touch with your old self-trainer and asking for some help. I think sorry, Juanita, you go.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think that one of the things that I thought in the design of when you train up to be a CELTA trainer, one of the design of it is that you're mentored through the experience. So if you can find someone to mentor you, not necessarily in the sense of sitting there and observing you observe, but just someone that's a go-to person who's an experienced observer that you can touch base and say, I did this observation, this is what happened, these are the issues that I want to discuss with the teacher, how can I go about doing that? Just having someone to discuss some strategies with from time to time. I think
the discussion is really key. I think that one of the things two of the things that I found most helpful was the amount of discussion in the CELTA, the amount of discussion between the trainers after lessons to clarify how they would respond to what they saw and so on. And occasionally, and you can sometimes do this in your own institutions, you do a double observation. So two of you go in and observe. This is how we trained up on the CELTA. You would observe the same lesson, and then you would sit down afterwards and work together on the kind of feedback and on your observations. And my suggestion there would be to find someone who is really quite different to you. I learnt the most when I was working with my first CELTA trainer, who was dramatically different to me in all respects, and I learnt so much from her because she took such a different approach to the observation and feedback.
Okay, and are there any books you can recommend?
Yes.
Not off the top of my head, actually.
No?
Juanita, I don't know if you can think of any.
I know that there's a couple, but the names escape me at this point. So perhaps what we could do, Sophie, is I'll do a little bit of digging and let you know, and then maybe you could post it up with the slides.
Perfect. I can send people a follow-up email or post it on the slides.
Yeah.
Great.
What I would say is that there is an amazing amount of material, and I learnt this doing my master's. There is an amazing amount of material on teacher professional development, and a lot of it does include observations, but not solely about observations and learning observation techniques. But some really valuable stuff. Things that I would recommend is things to do with teacher identity. I found really insightful about and really helpful in looking at observations, because you are really impacting on the identity of a teacher, because suddenly the teacher who is usually the expert at the front of the room is now no longer the expert at the front of the room. They're now the learner, but they still have their learners in front of them, and the new expert is suddenly just walked in and sitting up the back. It can really throw things out, and I think that's one of the most difficult things about observations, and some reading about that can really throw some light onto how to deal with it.
Okay, great. And someone's just commented that you should write a book, perhaps.
Yeah, okay.
Finally, Ian, there's just one question which you hopefully can answer in just 1 minute really quickly. Justin's asked, don't you need to point out deficiencies, especially if they're repetitive, but that could come across as negative?
I don't think there's anything wrong with correcting or with saying that, don't do this. I would just say There's also a way to say, I can see what you're trying to do, but the students need you to do X. So I can see why you're, I can't think of an example, I can see why you're yelling at that student because you want him to behave, but the students actually need you to be a professional and talk to them politely and so on. So, you know, not as a silly example, but I think you can turn things with a bit of creativity and a bit of thought. You can turn things around. One phrase that I think is that I learnt from Ruby Biscuit that I love is creativity over criticism. So, sorry, curiosity, not creativity. Curiosity over criticism. So ask the question of why, and sometimes you can ask yourself, why would that person be doing that, and try and find the reason before you just say, that was a stupid thing to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, is that it from Anne? And we might get started on Juanita's section now. So Juanita, you should be able to control the keyboard now. Yeah. Great.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. I didn't make a beautiful slide of myself like Ian did, but I'll tell you, I am currently the Director of Studies of Kaplan International English in Manly, but prior to that I was working as a CELTA tutor, and before that teaching and other sort of management roles. So I've been in the industry for about 15 years, more or less. And yeah, let's move on. That's me. It's not moving. Okay. So we're going to do observation. So in my session, in my part, we're going to observe a bit of a lesson. So the teacher that we're going to look, just to sort of put into practice some strategies for observing. The teacher that is teaching, her name is Anastasia. She's got a Russian background but is based in the UK. And this lesson that we're going to observe is the last lesson on her CELTA course. So she's a new teacher, but you know, still has a lot of strengths to give. So the learners that she's teaching, it's an intermediate level class, multilingual, because it's in the UK. And the average age of the students is about 25, mixed nationalities and genders. So pretty reflective of the kinds of students that we get in our colleges here in Australia. The lesson itself is taken from New Headway Intermediate. You may be familiar with the material, I think. And the aim is to practice listening for gist and specific information, present and practice modals of obligation. And the next slide is actually the material, just so you've got a bit of a reference point about what the learners are doing in the class and the context. I'll just quickly, it's about two teenage girls talking about school and their life at school and things they are allowed to do and aren't allowed to do as teenagers. So up here is a list of some of the observation criteria that we use in my centre. They're pretty broad-stroked things, and for myself anyway, coming from a CELTA trainer background, they're things that I can easily interpret but can be a little bit challenging for people if they don't have a lot of experience observing other teachers. On the pro forma that we use in my centre, there's a bit more explanation of each of those criteria. We can't really look at all of them, so I sort of decided to eliminate a few just to make it, oops, no, I have to go back. To eliminate a few just to make it a little bit more focused. So I chose these ones as ones for you all to focus on while you're watching the lesson. So by correction, error feedback, that kind of thing. I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory. Instructions, we're meaning, you know, the setup of tasks, and language is the teacher language. So are they grading their language, that kind of thing. And learner input is in the pro forma is sort of explained as maximizing learner participation. You know, also you can think about student to student, the balance of student to student interaction with teacher to student interaction. So, are there any questions about any of the criteria at this stage?
Sorry,
Sophie?
Sarah, just type the questions. There don't seem to be any questions.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on now to the video. So that link is the link to the video. So if you could copy and paste that link into your browser, or you can click on the link. And we're going to watch just the first, I think because we're running a little bit over time, we'll watch the first 10 minutes of the lesson. And so then after you've observed the first 10 minutes, then come back into the webinar. And while you're watching, just make some notes about those criteria in the previous slide, because we're going to have a bit of a discussion about the part that we've watched.
So we might just time 10 minutes instead of playing the video because people might get confused because they can't actually hear it.
So.
Yeah, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, someone's just said they can't hear anything. If you're still with us, you're meant to be watching the video through your own web browser for 10 minutes.
So we might come back to the rest of the presentation now.
Has that been 10 minutes?
I think it's been.
I think it's about 1 minute it has, just
Yeah.
so everyone's back.
Yeah. Oh, what happened then?
You okay?
Yeah, no, the guillotine just fell off the table. Can you see when they're back, Sophie?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so I think people are coming back now.
Okay. So maybe if you can just type in just a quick message back, just so we can gauge how many people are ready.
Yep, so people are back.
Okay. So while the video was going there, I had a question from someone about that this approach isn't very targeted, which I think is a good point. And I guess what I'd say to that is that if I'm observing a teacher for the first time, which we all are at this, I mean, most of you are at this point, I would go in with no sort of strategy yet, just to see where they're at in terms of their experience and their delivery, and then from that first observation develop the action plan. So no, it's a very open kind of approach, mainly coming from the perspective of it being the first time that you've observed this teacher. So you don't really know what they're like. I mean, it would be worth sitting down with a teacher beforehand and getting them to identify what they would like you to be looking out for, what they've found difficult in the past, or if they can identify any kind of focus area before going in, and then working from there. So if you can type in any ideas you've got from watching the lesson about the points that I've put up on the slide there. We certainly don't have to go through all of them because we are getting a bit pressed for time. So if there's any one of those that jumps out at you as something that the teacher did particularly well, or something that you think that is something she could work on, just type them into the box.
So, do you want me to read the comments yet?
Yeah, okay.
Or shall I wait a bit?
Maybe wait a bit.
Okay.
Perhaps if you could start, Sophie, telling me some of the things that people have got there.
Okay, so someone said that, Supreet said that the teacher's a bit unsure and seems nervous.
Mm-hmm.
She needs to tell students about the camera too. Betty said good classroom atmosphere.
Yep.
Will said the example could have been elicited as a model.
Mm-hmm.
Kylie has said that the instructions are clear, but there are no ICQs, instruction checking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had to repeat the instructions as she circulated. Maybe she should have demonstrated how to use the language she wanted them to use.
Yeah, so I'll just speak to that for a minute, because I guess in practice, in observing, certainly while I was working as a CELTA tutor, and definitely now when I observe teachers, my focus is more on the students, less on the teacher, and the impact of what the teacher does on the students. So I think what Carly's raised there is a good point, is that if the teacher sets up a task and then has to go around and re-explain the task to all the students, then there was a problem with the setup. Maybe it's because she didn't use ICQs. Maybe it's because the language they used in the instructions was too convoluted, too complex. I think one of the issues that this teacher has as well is when she's setting up, she moves around a lot. So there isn't an opportunity for the students to have one focus and one clear point to look at. So ICQs could be part of the problem, but there are other issues with, like, the language she chose to use in the instructions was okay, but just the moving around and then the fact that she had to re-explain it because they didn't know what to do. And a model is also a good point. And what else is there, Sophie?
And then Selena is the last person who commented, said that from the start the teacher tried to set an inviting atmosphere, and she thinks she achieved this because the students did engage.
Yes, they did. And one of the areas where this, one of the strengths I would say for this teacher is in building rapport and creating, a positive environment, relaxing learning environment. Other areas where I think there's room for development is the students were engaged, but was their participation in the lesson maximized? And perhaps there's things like eliciting, put more personalization. We tend to bring personalization in at the end of language lessons, but why can't it be integrated through the whole lesson? More comprehensive error feedback. There was some error feedback, but did they get enough support with the error feedback? Given that she's a new teacher, these are quite common areas that I observed anyway as a CELTA tutor, as areas, as areas that teachers develop as they get more experience. But in terms of an action plan for this teacher, these would be the kind of areas I'd be highlighting.
Okay, and there's just one other question we need on that topic. How would you give the students more support with the error correction and feedback?
So drilling, more drilling of pronunciation errors, writing the pron on the whiteboard, perhaps eliciting, if it's errors with use, eliciting example sentences or contexts where the language might be used. Just being a little bit more sensitive to this was a mistake. Why was it a mistake? How can they correct it? But remember that correction and use it later. I don't know if that's enough of an answer. So I'm going to. That's just a summary of some of the things that I identified in the lesson. The next stage, I guess, for this teacher, in light of some of the things that Ian said, would be to discuss some of the points identified and then develop a plan of something that she's going to work on. But all the areas developed that I've put there, it's a lot of stuff, and it's more stuff than a person can do in 1 or 2 or even a dozen lessons. But to narrow this down to one area or 2 areas of their teaching that then will have a knock-on effect on the other areas. So things like maximizing student involvement, perhaps classroom management and position the classroom would tie in together. And then the error feedback and the student involvement, I think, could tie together, because eliciting error correction from the students is certainly a strategy that we tried to train the CELTA trainees on, developing that ability to not just correct them, but to draw more from the student. So if there aren't any more questions from me, I'm going to pass over to Aparna.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions for Juanita before we pass over? You can type them in if you do. Okay, well, if you do, we can, if we've got time, we can answer them at the end. So do type them in. And Aparna is going to start her section on feedback now.
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everybody. I'm Aparna Jacob, and I'm the Director of Studies at Strathfield College. The reason I chose to do the section on feedback is because it's a very interesting way to approach the topic of observation and reflection. At Strathfield College, we hire a lot of young teachers fresh out of CELTA, and for me, the whole process of observation has been interesting from the point of view of these new teachers and what can be given to them to support them best in the classroom. We have a range of teachers in our staff room, very experienced, ones who've got 3 to 4 years of experience, and the ones who've got a few months of teaching experience. The perception, though, of observations is always the same. I'm just waiting for the next slide to load. Now, this is what makes an observer's job very difficult. This perception that the observee is being judged or evaluated by the observer. Some teachers imagine this is a chance for the DOS to catch out teachers doing something wrong in the classroom. Now, if we can change that perception to assure teachers that the main purpose of observation is really their development as opposed to evaluation, and focusing on the growth of the teacher rather than being punitive in nature, it would not be such an ordeal. In Ian's section, we talked about evaluations as part of an observation, and it does have its place. But for this section, I'm going to focus mainly on observation as a PD tool. So how I pitch observations to my teachers, at least, is to ask them, what do you want me to specifically look for and help with when I come into your class for this observation? This is a platform for a pre-observation conversation, and this really sets the stage for a dialogue about teaching, a dialogue between equals more than the observer in a position of power telling the observee how to do their job. Now, all teachers could use a fresh set of eyes, a different perspective in their classroom, because new teachers especially can't see everything that's happening in the classroom. We saw that with the video that we just watched with Juanita. It's impossible for a new teacher to check on classroom management, if instructions have been understood, if the students are on task at the same time. And this is where the observer comes in and tells them that you could have probably focused on this a bit more. The image I've got there is of T.J. Eckelberg from The Great Gatsby, the all-seeing eyes. And again, evaluation or development. For this section, we're going to focus on development. Now, the conversation you've started with the teacher before observation can set you up very nicely for the feedback stage. How you envision observations could be constructive feedback aimed at teacher development, which means the teachers take the feedback on board, or they come up with the feedback themselves. They reflect on their practice, try something out in the classroom. You can help them put together an action plan, and once they've tried out and identified areas they need to continue working on, you go through another cycle of observation, which in turn will bring up more feedback, more areas to work on, and the cycle continues. Now, reflective practice is a buzzword in ESL. It has been for a while now, and really focusing on reflection, on practices opens up opportunities for teachers to come up with self-evaluation as opposed to evaluation, which is viewed as judgmental, punitive, and so on. Now, as Ian said, we do have different kinds of observations, and feedback changes according to the kind of observation you're doing. You have to tailor your feedback according to the level of teacher you're observing. So, for instance, a step one teacher, a stage one teacher who is quite new, does look to you as an authority on the subject, and they do need more evaluation and guidance to set them on the right track. They do actually look to you for active input and suggestions and guidance. Teachers with a bit of experience are often in danger of getting tired of their own methods. They're trying a few things in class, and often they stick to trying the same things again and again. They're often looking to infuse new energy into their classroom, and they really want more ideas and to come up with alternatives to try out in the classroom. With the more experienced teachers who have seen and done it all, they don't need ideas so much, but what they do need is for the observer to understand, in some ways validate their methods, and even help them refine their techniques a bit. So they can build their own confidence and then pass it on to the less experienced teachers in the staff room. What really helps is to have an observation feedback, which will make the feedback session less painful. Now, we talked a bit about starting a dialogue with the teacher before the observation. Ian mentioned how observation should not just be the first conversation you have with the teacher post-observation. Being involved in the lesson planning stage, asking questions like, what do you want me to help you with? What areas are you concerned with? It could be something as unique as just drilling, or it could be classroom management and bigger issues. Teaching a grammar point and guided discovery could be one area. Starting this conversation, you mutually agree on criteria for observation. It's also important to agree on a focus area for the observation. And sorry, just going back to the criteria for observation, one of the things Tamsin asked was, how does one become an observer? Sorry, Sophie, I can't change my slide.
Forward?
Yep. Now, Tamsin, just to answer your question briefly from my perspective, I haven't been a CELTA trainer, but I was thrown in at the deep end observing a lot of teachers because of the volume of new teachers we had. I've been through a few stages, thinking less is more, which was not productive, having to streamline the amount of feedback given to a teacher and isolate key areas of focus for the teacher, which then helps you and the teacher to focus on specific things rather than everything. One way to become an observer is to actually do a few observations and get some practice in that area and refine your own way of giving feedback. Now, this is something we borrowed from Navitas and then adapted to our own needs. A set of observation criteria that I got the teachers to mutually agree on, and we put this list together. We put it together. It's important to look at this list and think about what do students need in the classroom. What exactly makes a good lesson? And there's so many abstract elements involved in observation that if you can make it as concrete as possible, so that both the observer and the observee know what is being looked at, it makes everybody's job easier. It's not as simple as ticking boxes. Yes, there are boxes to be ticked, but you can always supplement with comments, with links, and extra materials for reading that goes into this observation and follow-up. I'll just go back to the observation framework slide. So we were talking about focus areas for the observation. Once you've decided on that, it may change during the course of the observed lesson, because classes, so many things happen during the course of class. That's okay. New areas will emerge as well. But usually it's a good idea to have a pre-observation meeting and discuss on what areas you'll be focusing on. Post-observation discussion is extremely crucial. Now, one of the things I get the teachers to do, and Ian mentioned this as well, is to fill in a reflection form immediately. And this is important for the observer as well as the observee, to write down at least 2 main questions from the observee's point of view. Do you think you achieved your aims for this lesson? What do you think you would have done differently if teaching this lesson again? And I'm always surprised at how 70% of the feedback that I plan on delivering can be elicited from the teachers just through reflection. And this is also the beauty of reflective practice, where teachers self-evaluate, they self-assess, and come up with their own action plan for their lesson. Now, when you actually go into suggesting alternatives to the teachers during the course of your post-feedback discussion, this is not so much a criticism of what was done in class, but it is more to give them options. For example, we talked about teachers who have 1 or 2 years of experience and are looking for more ideas. So this dialogue becomes a broader dialogue about teaching in general and teaching methods in general, rather than saying do this or eliciting suggestions from teachers as far as possible. And in some ways, the observer's role is to guide the teachers to discover their own strengths and weaknesses. So asking leading questions is okay as long as you lead them to the answer. Asking the teacher how they think the lesson went, and listening without judgment or interrupting with your own suggestions, because the minute you interrupt with suggestions, you're circumventing that crucial reflection process on the part of the teacher. And that is the aspect that needs to be maximized. Finally, you finish off on a positive note with an action plan for the future. You've now isolated a few areas for the teacher to work on. You've done this jointly. There is no power imbalance. It's been a discussion between equals in some ways. You then set a date for the next observation, or a period during which the teacher is going to work on this. And like Juanita said, it would be great to combine a few areas that would have the maximum impact in the classroom, especially in the case of a teacher where you've noticed a few different things that need working on. Sorry, Sophie. We're now going to, oh, sorry. Yep.
Yep. You can talk.
Oh, okay, thanks. We're now going to look at some commonly held beliefs on observation, and this in some ways sums up our discussion for today. The answers are not yes and no, so we might just get you to answer the first question. There are 10 questions in all. Sophie, do we have any answers?
Yep, we do. I'll just wait till they all come in.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll share the answer to the first one. So can everybody see the answer?
Yep.
Yep.
So I can see that not many people are a fan of the feedback sandwich, and Ian isn't either. I I think the feedback sandwich still has its uses. One, you leave on a positive note. You begin gently. Well, I don't think the feedback sandwich really means positive, negative, positive only. You try and end on a high, and by that I mean the action plan, which would mean there is something to work towards rather than a feeling of, well, these are the things you need to do now. If you want to move from positives to negatives gradually, please make sure you always leave with something to work on. Sophie, can we have the next question, please?
Yep, someone just commented that some teachers know this feedback sandwich model, and could it be condescending?
I think reinforcing the positive, and this is one of the questions we'll be doing now, is as important as bringing up areas to work on, because often teachers are not really aware of what they're doing, and if you notice that they're doing something well, it should be reinforced and mentioned, and this is why bringing up the positives at the beginning need not sound condescending. It just needs to be highlighted just as importantly as the negatives.
Okay, sure. I'll bring up the next one. So there's another question to answer now.
Yep.
Okay, I'll share the results. Can you see the results?
Yep, I can see the results. The observer's
Great.
experience and opinions are crucial to feedback. True. Stick to the facts rather than opinions. Ian, what do you say to this?
Does my microphone work?
Yes.
I would say Juanita's made a really good comment here. Stick to the evidence, and I think that's really the key there, as opposed to facts. I don't think there are facts, but there's evidence of what you see, what the students do, what the students gain from what has happened. That's really the most important thing. Look, I think experience and opinions are definitely important. I think that teaching is not a scientific process. It's a human interaction, and so human stories are vital to the learning process.
I think also in one situation, there are different situations where these two statements would be more relevant. One would be more relevant than the other. For instance, if you have a very inexperienced teacher, they are looking to you for active guidance, and that's where if you have a teacher with quite a bit of experience and you want to give them some constructive feedback, there needs to be evidence pointed out, and anything you say needs to be supported by why and how and the reasons why you're telling them this. Otherwise, it's quite abstract.
Can also be an opportunity for a shared experience in that I've learnt that too. I did a similar thing, and here's how I approached it.
Yep.
I mean, to be a little bit controversial, I don't know if this is controversial, but recently I did an observation with a teacher, and part of the process was for the teacher to elicit feedback from the students through written anonymous feedback. So when we did the observation feedback, it wasn't just what did I observe from the lesson, what did the teacher experience from the lesson, but we actually had some tangible evidence from the students to sort of to add to it. And it just helped the teacher see things a little bit more from the student's perspective.
I agree. Sophie, could we move on to the next question, please?
Yep. Okay, I'll show the results now.
Yep. Fantastic. I think padding criticism is again, it makes it quite vague, and you're actually doing your teacher a lot of disservice if you're not specific, you don't have evidence-based comments to make. Could we move on to the next one, please?
Sure. Results are up.
Fantastic. I think in cases like new teachers, the video that we just watched, there are a lot of areas that the teacher needs to work on, but like Juanita suggested, clubbing certain areas that could have the maximum impact on the teaching would be productive, which means reducing it to 3 areas, maybe not more than 3, but pick your number. Next one, please, Sophie.
Sharing results.
Focus areas should be mutually agreed on. This could change over the course of the lesson, depending on what happens in the classroom, and that could be discussed. And I'm pretty confident that this will come up once the teacher reflects and says, well, this is what I planned to do, but this is not how it worked out. This is what I would have done different, and that's likely to come up. Could we move on to the next one, please, Sophie?
Sure. Okay, sharing results.
Wow.
Very good. 100%.
That's interesting. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Can I throw in a point that I made earlier here? I'm very happy that that's people's response. I think that, yes, they should be mutually agreed on. I would go a big step further, though, and say that there shouldn't be criteria. A professional development observation should be a learning focus with key learning aims, but criteria are more for quality control and should be kept there. I think if you're using a set of general criteria, then you've got a general quality control observation. If you're doing both, then you're just going to step over your own toes and water down the benefit of both options.
Yep. Sophie,
Okay,
could we have the
next one?
The next one, please.
That one was pretty obvious.
Yep, that's pretty obvious. This question was included because of time constraints on everybody's part. We're all busy people. But one, to keep it relevant, to keep the memory of what was seen and discussed quite fresh, and to get onto the action plan as quickly as possible. Thanks, Sophie. The next one, please.
Okay, and sharing. Is that the wrong question?
No, I can't see the results though.
I can't see. There.
Fantastic, because we don't want observations to be a yearly performance where the teachers put on a show for the DOS. We want it to be a process that is constant. Next one, please, Sophie. 2 more to go.
Sure. There was a question about agreeing on criteria.
Yep.
Someone asked, what about surprise elements of the observation?
What kind of surprise elements?
Oh, I'm not sure. It just said, what about surprise elements of the observation? If you agree on criteria.
If something goes wrong, probably.
Possibly, yeah. Yes.
But I think if it's a professional development observation, it doesn't matter because things happen. You know, the whole actually. To be honest, I think on CELTA courses, just to use as another example, so many times we had situations where teachers had planned lessons for a class size of 10, for example, and then on the day only 4 or 5 students would turn up, or 6 students would turn up. So, you know, they had to adjust the lesson plan accordingly. And being trainee teachers, you know, freaked them out a little bit, knowing that they're being assessed and all the rest of it. But for the purposes of professional development, if that happens, how do you deal with it? And that's the learning opportunity, is how do you deal with the surprise elements?
Yep. Okay. And this is the
you
last
might make a passing comment, but I don't think you would really spend a lot of time focusing on it. It wouldn't become a new focus. Just to go back though, because I've actually seen this done, and I'm not sure if the question came in this manner, but surprise elements I have seen use of suddenly I'm going to ask you about X, Y, or Z, or expect you to do something different. I think it's really key, and I think everyone's responded in the way that makes me think that that's probably not the case. But just to clarify, it's really key that you do stick to the process and the issues that you've agreed upon.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll just launch the last poll now, because we'll be needing to finish in a couple of minutes.
Yep. This was a point we covered earlier in terms of, do the positives need to be addressed? Can it come across as condescending? And Ian made a point about it's all in the delivery. It's how you deliver this information.
Okay. Okay, votes are in, and I'll share it.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Sometimes people can't identify their own strengths.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, Aparna, did you have anything else you wanted to go through?
Are we moving through the last couple of slides? There's 2 more left.
Okay.
And I'll just go through them very quickly.
All right, everyone's still with us, so...
oh, good. Well, thanks for hanging on. How do we get back to the PowerPoint, Sophie?
It should be there. Can you not see it?
No, I can't.
No.
Yeah,
maybe I'll just talk through it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I can see the PowerPoint, but yeah, if that's okay.
I think the next slide had a couple of useful phrases, because when I first started observing teachers and giving feedback, I really struggled to say the right things. I was too direct, had teachers in tears sometimes. I put together a couple of phrases that you can use when you do feedback with teachers. The last slide was really about dealing with fixed mindsets. Now, there are some teachers who are happy to accept feedback, but it can completely crush them. There are others who refuse to accept any feedback. Now, these two personality types or mindsets really come from people who take the feedback too personally. It's very important with these people to provide evidence for the feedback you're giving them and tell them why it works or why it doesn't work. There are others who, I call them blame it on the rain and the optimist without a cause. These two mindsets don't take feedback seriously enough. Now, this is where, when Ian talked about quality, sorry, I forget what you said. Ian, was it quality control?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yep. This is where you refer back to expectations of the organization, what you expect of teachers in terms of delivery and student expectations, and make it quite clear that this is what is expected of a teacher in this organization. So that was 2 slides that we haven't been able to cover today. And the last one was a list of reading. Now, someone I found quite useful when I started doing teacher observations was Mike Griffin. You must have heard of him. On his blog, ELT Rants, Reviews, Reflections, he talks a lot about what he does not want to hear when he's observed. I find it really interesting to look at observations from the teacher's point of view or from a student's point of view, and then tailor feedback accordingly. I also have included a few links, so people who've been asking for a few links, I can supply some articles to Sophie to put up as well, along with Juanita's recommendations, and we can put together a reading list on where to look for more information on observations. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So we'll have to finish now. There were a few other questions that came in. Just for the presenters, are you happy to take them away with you, and then I can follow up with responses to the people who attended the webinar?
Yeah,
Yes, Sophie.
Sure.
Yep. Okay. So if you've asked a question and we haven't had a chance to address it, then I'll get the presenters to answer the questions, and then I'll email out their responses to everyone. Well, thank you very much to our presenters. It was a really useful session. And thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar and for sticking around until 5:30. Hopefully we'll get you attending some other webinars with us soon in the future. Okay, well that's it for me. Presenters, did you want to say anything else?
Can I say one last thing that I think that,
yes.
sorry, spoke on top of, sorry, that I think that a really good idea to put observations in a context would be to have a look at the recently released English Australia Best Practice Guide on Professional Development. It covers a full spectrum of professional development concepts, ideas, methods, and so on. And really shows observations as a part of that bigger picture.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ian. And if you, as a member college staff member, you can access the guide for free on our website. You just need your college's login details. And if you don't know what they are, then just email me. I've got my email up on the screen. Can you guys see that now on the screen?
Yes.
Aparna and everyone?
No.
Yes.
No, we're stuck on slide 31 right now.
Okay, that's fine. So my email's on the English Australia website. It's Sophie O'Keefe, and just email me if you have any questions or need your login details. Okay, well, we might finish up there. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.